is Johnny and I'm going to grad school. Hi, so my name is Johnny and yes, I am indeed going to grad school. I'm actually going to be attending Pepperdine University online, the online MSBA program at Pepperdine University. So it's a Master's in Business Analytics program. So the intention behind this video is mainly to just give people who are looking into Master's in Business Analytics programs more insight on them. I did do a YouTube search prior to applying, prior to starting my research process, and I couldn't really find a lot of information. There are a few videos that made a distinction between an MSBA program and Master's in Data Analytics, but I felt like there wasn't really a lot of information that dove into applying to a Master's in Business Analytics program. So here I am, fulfilling, a gap in knowledge, fulfilling a need. Whether or not I will actually be successful in that, time will tell. So yeah, so that's why I'm making this video. So I'm guessing if you're watching this, you are also applying to a Master's in Business Analytics program, or maybe you're thinking about it, or you're trying to just find out more information as far as the difference between a Master's in Business Analytics or a Master's in Data Analytics, or maybe you're just bored. I don't know. This would be a weird video to watch if you were bored, but hey, I'm glad you're watching. Class A, sponsor me. I wanted to give a brief intro of myself and I guess some of my stats. I grew up in the Bay Area, Daly City, so south of San Francisco to be exact, but I usually just say San Francisco, it's a lot easier. People are more familiar with it than they are with Daly City. So from the Bay Area originally, grew up there my whole life, worked in various different fields coming out of high school, while also going to community college, specifically the community college or city college of San Francisco. So I was there for quite a long time, working on undergrad prereqs to hopefully transfer to a UC of some sort. I was specifically trying to get into the UC system. That didn't really pan out. Got into a different program that was at City of College for San Francisco. That's a story for another day, but got into a program, didn't really work out, and then moved to Portland, Oregon. I've been living here for almost 5 years now, so that's crazy. But I, in the process, applied to Portland State University, and that's where I finished my undergrad degree. Finally, I'm 29, so at Portland State, I majored in business. I knew I wanted to go into business, or I knew I wanted to focus on business because I had already been working for a kind of large corporation moving out here. And prior to that, in San Francisco, I had worked at a couple of startups. So I had that experience under my belt, and I knew that I wanted to continue my career down that path. And I just knew that I wanted to have that security belt of a bachelor's degree under my belt, even though at that point I probably would be in the same place that I am now had I not completed that degree, but I just wanted the reassurance of knowing that I had completed it. I wanted to commit that time and put in that effort and money, and just give myself that reassurance that I would have that degree to fall back on should anything happen, really. Oh, I did want to mention, I was on the university honors program for the last half of my time at Portland State, so just from 2018 to 2019. It was just something that I knew would set me apart on my academic resume. I knew at some point in time I wanted to pursue a master's degree, and I knew that this would be something good to have on my resume, essentially. And it also helped me just with my studies overall. I definitely can tend to be more black and white with my thinking, and it's hard to hard to keep in mind other perspectives. And there were definitely some classes that I took in my university honors program that helped me break out of that a bit, or at least be a little bit more mindful. So yeah, that's my academic resume up until this point. Oh, and I had a 3.3 GPA cumulative when I graduated. So not the best, but not the worst. I think for someone that was working full time and had been in school for as long as I was, I don't think that it's as, or at least it's not as bad as having like, you know, below a 3.0. In terms of why I'm pursuing a master's in business analytics, currently working for a corporation. I won't disclose just because of privacy reasons, but I'm currently working for a fairly large corporation, and I, through the years, have been tasked with completing kind of smaller projects that require a little bit of coding on SQL, creating forecasts and things of that nature, and I really enjoyed it, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to truly move past the novice level that I'm at by picking up different techniques and different skills from peers or even leaders. One, because they don't have the time to sit down with me and teach me these things. They have things that they need to do, and so do I. And two, I didn't want to have a haphazard foundation of these skills that are super transferable within the business analytics realm. So I wanted to have a more solid foundation under my belt, and I figured, you know, I could take a Coursera class. It would be a lot easier on the wallet, that's for sure, but I wanted something that would be a little bit more substantial, and I figured if I was going to commit the time outside of work, then I might as well just pursue a master's degree. Like I said earlier, it's something that I had already been thinking about, so I just thought, we're in a pandemic, I have nowhere to go, and especially having worked full-time while doing undergrad full-time, I weirdly miss the extra workload after work. I don't know, call me crazy. I miss that feeling of having to balance a lot of things at once outside of work. So, you know, I'm home anyway, so I might as well go for it. But yeah, I wanted to have a more solid foundation under my belt as far as these skills within business analytics, and have a more solid understanding of it. Yeah, so mainly if I move to a different company or just stay within the company I'm with now and move, you know, laterally or move up within a certain role or path, I would have that foundation to fall back on, and I wouldn't have these kind of like scrapped together haphazard skills that maybe wouldn't be the most transferable, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's why I'm pursuing a master's in business analytics. I choose, it's raining, so the light is going in and out. I apologize for that, but what can you do? Just try to use natural lighting. I only applied to 3 schools. I'm not even gonna lie. I did get influenced by the college decision videos that a lot of kids make coming out of high school, entering college for the first time. Yes, I'm 29. I don't know. I fell down a rabbit hole on YouTube in the process of researching schools and watched a ton of these college decision videos where kids would apply to like 20 plus schools and have to make a decision, and it just didn't make sense to me, at least for what I want to do and what I want to study. So I only applied to 3 schools. At the end of the day, I can only go to 1, so it didn't really make sense to apply to a bunch of schools. And on top of that, I didn't want to have to write 20 plus essays. You know, take into account there's typically about 3 essay prompts per application, so that's 60 essays. And on top of that, it costs money to apply. Now, you could get around that if you applied pre-priority or I think it's pre-priority or priority. Usually it's pre-priority, at least for 2 of the applications that I submitted, they were pre-priority, so I got the application fee waived. But you know, if you want to take more time in crafting the perfect essay for your application, then that might not be super viable for you, so take that into account. But I only applied to 3 schools, and I applied to 3 separate programs, so not all 3 are actually Masters in Business Analytics programs. And there was some reasoning behind it, mainly because all 3 programs kind of encompassed business analytics, so I knew whichever one that I chose, was accepted to and chose to attend, that I would still be studying business analytics at the end of the day. So the 3 programs that I applied to, the first was UC Davis's MBA program. So not a Master's in Business Analytics specifically, but they had a business analytics course track that I would have chosen had I decided to go to that school. It was an online program. All 3 programs were all online, so there wasn't really an issue of location for me. So ultimately, I was accepted into this program, but I declined because of the price. The MBA program online at UC Davis came out to $104,000, and at the time when I was applying, I wasn't really expecting to get in, but I was so set on attending a UC that I didn't care what the cost would be. But when I faced the truth that I could potentially go to that school, and you know, I could potentially make that return on investment depending on the average salary of a business analyst, especially based in Portland, I just thought it would just be not worth the amount of money that I'd be initially investing. So ultimately I turned them down, which was crazy. So the second program that I applied to was UC Berkeley's Master's in Data Science program. And this was definitely a reach for me. I knew that I didn't have the strongest GPA going into applying for master's programs, and the biggest thing really is that I didn't have a ton of experience, whether it be just outside of work or within work, that touched on some of the core curriculum that would be focused in that program. So I knew it was a long shot, that it would be I would have a really difficult time with that program if I had been accepted, because of course I would attend, but I knew it was going to be a struggle. So in the end, I'm kind of glad that it worked out the way that it did. And the last program that I applied to is Pepperdine. Pepperdine's a Master's in Business Analytics program. Given the MBA program at UC Davis and the Master's in Data Analytics program at UC Berkeley, this program just really seemed to fit exactly what I want to achieve at the end of this, and the skills that I want to obtain through school. So it actually ended up being the perfect fit for what I want to achieve, and the perfect fit as far as what is going to be covered in the program. Because with UC Davis, their core curriculum included finance and accounting all over again, and I just didn't want to retake those classes. I didn't see the point in it since I had already studied those courses in my undergrad. So with Pepperdine, it felt like I was just going to be fast-tracked into gaining and learning skills that would be directly, for the most part, directly applicable to my current role and future roles. So I chose Pepperdine. Now I'll just dive into the timeline of my application. So like I said, I had been thinking about applying to master's programs in the past while I was in undergrad, but I wasn't really sure when I would actually take the plunge and go ahead and apply. But the timeline that I'm about to give makes it sound like I made this decision in a really short time frame, when in reality it was something that I had on the back burner and then just decided to pull the trigger on finally. So don't think that I just up and decided to apply to a master's program and make this huge commitment as far as time and money in about a month. But it was about a month time frame. The biggest factor in that too was that all three programs that I applied to didn't require a GRE. They would accept it if you had already taken it, but it wasn't a requirement for the application, so that definitely cut the amount of time that I would have spent on my applications into a third of the time essentially. So that's a big factor as well. If you're applying to a program that doesn't require the GRE, then you don't really need that much time as far as the actual application process. So yeah, so with my timeline, I started researching programs at about mid to late July, and after doing some research, I ultimately decided on the 3 programs that I was going to apply to. And my search was pretty narrow based on cost, location, and of course the program curriculum. With cost, I obviously didn't want to incur a huge amount of debt. Having gone to Portland State, I was very fortunate to not have to pay back thousands and thousands of dollars back in loans. I think my total cost overall actually came out to about $15K. So that's a lot more manageable, and I wanted to try to attend a program that would be as close to that as possible. Nothing close to 100K or anything of that sort. There's just no way I would want to commit to that. So cost was important. I had my sights set on going to a UC, but I was open to other schools like LMU or Pepperdine, which ultimately is where I'm going. But I was open to other colleges outside of the UC system, but I knew I wanted to go to a school based in California, not necessarily a school based in Oregon. Since it's all online anyway, I figured I would take advantage and, maybe apply to a school with a little bit more clout, I don't know. But yeah, I figured, if I'm going to make this commitment for time and money, then I might as well go to a school that I really, really want to attend, not just because it's what's local to me. Not that Portland State's not a good school, it's a great school. Highly recommend. In terms of curriculum, obviously I wanted to study business analytics. I didn't want to I didn't want to get a refresher in business core courses, since that was something that I already studied in undergrad. I also excluded programs in the East Coast because I didn't want to deal with the I didn't want to deal with the difference in time with schools on the East Coast being 3 hours ahead of me. That would just cut into my work schedule, since I am still working full-time and plan on continuing to work full-time while pursuing my master's in business analytics. So I knew that I wouldn't really be setting myself up for success if I attended a school that was in a different time zone. So that was a big factor as well. So once I had narrowed down the three programs I wanted to apply to, it was just a matter of gathering everything in time. So I started with the essay prompts, and it took me about a month and a half to complete the essay prompts for all 3 applications. For UC Davis, I think it was 5 essay prompts. I think 3 were required and 2 were optional, but I just did all of them. I just figured I'd rather give as much context as possible, since I'm not submitting a GRE, as opposed to only giving them a limited amount of information about me that would demonstrate whether or not I'd be a good fit for the program. So that was my strategy for all of the applications that I submitted. And then I completed, I think it was 5 or 6 essay prompts for UC Berkeley's Master's in Data Science program as well. So that took some time. And then it was, I think it was only 3 essay prompts for Pepperdine's Master's in Business Analytics online program. So with all 3, I used some of the same answers, but then of course tailored them to the application that I was submitting to, but I didn't write a whole new essay for each one, especially if the prompt was similar. For all three, I did have to submit a statement of purpose, so I kind of wrote my statement of purpose. I wrote it for one specific program and then just took it and then tailored it for the other two programs as well. And I would say it was successful since, you know, I was accepted to 2 out of the 3 programs. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt if you want to write a separate statement of purpose for each program, or if you want to do what I did or something in between. It's really up to you and your level of writing ability and, you know, the amount of time that you can afford to commit to doing something like that. But that was my timeline. So I started researching programs in mid to late July, and then I started my applications in August, and then I was able to submit 2 out of the 3 applications pre-priority, so I was able to get the application fee waived, and those were like the end to beginning of October. And then for one other program, I submitted the application priority. So I had to pay the application fee for that program, but you know, 1 out of 3 is not too bad, so I was only out, you know, $150. The last piece of the timeline was just finding out when I was accepted, or finding out if I was accepted to these programs, and I would say it took about 2 to 3 weeks for each one. 2 to 3 weeks from the date that I submitted the applications to actually find out if I was accepted. So that was nice, even though those 2 weeks were grueling and I was really stressed to find out whether or not I was accepted. You know, I know that with students coming out of high school and applying to their undergrad programs, they typically have to wait months at a time until they find out whether or not they're accepted. So 2 to 3 weeks, you know, I was able to bear it. And then the other thing that I would say that was a priority with my timeline was getting all of my transcripts submitted. Usually, or at least for the programs I applied to, they required unofficial transcripts, but of course, if you were to be accepted and you decided to attend that college or that program, then you'd have to submit your official transcripts any which way. So I just took it upon myself to submit my official transcripts to all 3 schools, and I made sure that I gave myself enough time so that they would be actually a part of my application once I submitted it, not, you know, submitted after I've submitted the application, and then it would take time for that to be attached to my application, if that makes any sense. I just wanted to make sure that once I submitted my application, everything was packaged and good to go. There wasn't anything pending. Interviews and letter of rec. So I only had to do 1 interview for UC Davis's MBA program, and it was actually a really crazy experience because we had experienced some wildfires in Oregon and in California, and they were spreading, and it caused quite a lot of anxiety for everyone, and even more so, it devastated a lot of families. And it was kind of in the beginning of that where people in Portland may or may not have needed to evacuate due to the wildfire spreading. So prior to my interview with my UC Davis advisor, I freaked out, panicked, got all of my important documents ready should we need to evacuate, took pictures of everything in the apartment, packed a go bag, crazy, and then suddenly just realized that I needed to collect myself for the interview and hadn't done any practice questions because it was framed as a casual conversation, even though it was very much an interview at the end of the day. So I was very, I don't want to say frazzled, but when I'm nervous, I tend to turn up the notch in terms of being more bubbly, and I guess it worked out because I got accepted, but yeah, it felt awful. It felt like I wasn't really being true to myself. But the interview itself was pretty standard and straightforward. Questions just like, why do you want to attend this school? Why are you pursuing this program? What do you have to offer? Things of that nature. Pretty similar to questions that you would actually get in a job interview. So my biggest recommendation would be, even though it's framed as a casual conversation, to just do practice questions any which way. You would think I would have done that, but I didn't want to overthink it, and I wanted my answers to come across as genuine as possible. And it worked out. But if you're someone who likes to prepare, or you tend to get really nervous with interviews, then I would make sure to do some practice questions. I will say that my interview was recorded, and my advisor that I did it with let me know that she was about to start the recording. I let her know I was ready, and then she recorded my answers, and that video was attached to my application as well. So, if knowing that your interview is going to be recorded and that adds more pressure for you, then I would just make sure to practice. Letters of recommendation. So I would say I'm not going to give a ton of advice with this, just because different programs require different things. But for the programs that I applied to, letters of recommendations were required, at least 2. And they were professional letters of recommendation, so not necessarily academic letters of recommendations. And I think this ties into kind of the nature of the programs themselves, where it's not research-based, it's not a super academic, master's degree that I'm going to be pursuing. It's definitely more kind of real-world skills and application. So that's why, it's the median age tends to be a little bit later, like mid to late 30s. So it just makes sense to require more, work-related, like letters of recommendation, as opposed to academic letters of recommendation. But it depends on which program you're applying to. So in which case, I asked a colleague, someone that was a coworker, but not necessarily in the same department as me, but has a ton of exposure to my working style, what I've done within my role and for the company that we work for, and then my boss. In which case, I think what really helped was more so the colleague, because he and I had been working in the same kind of space for the whole time that I've been with the company that I work for, whereas my boss came in a little bit later and has only been managing me for the last 2.5 years, 3 years, I think. No, 2 years. So tenure is important to consider. So if you're looking to get letters of recommendation from someone at work, then take into account tenure. You don't necessarily have to reach out to someone or reach out to your boss. I just figured, who else besides that colleague would know best, as far as my working style, and be able to attest to what I can contribute. So that's why I chose my boss and my colleague. But if you want to choose 2 colleagues, go for it. I would just ask your advisor what would be the best route if you're unsure. And lastly, I want to talk about how to be competitive with your application, because I think this is something that comes into play that doesn't get touched on a lot, or maybe it does and I just haven't seen those videos, I don't know. But being competitive and making your application stand out as much as possible is super crucial to ultimately getting into the program that you want to go to. So the first tip that I would give is, of course, make sure that your GPA is at least at the minimum. I know I said it's not the end all be all, it's not the most important thing, but you want to at least be at the minimum of what the program is requiring for entry, right? So make sure that you have that squared away. And if not, then I would just ask the admissions advisor point blank, just if there's any chance in getting admitted, with a GPA despite having, you know, a lot of work experience or having done self-study for some of the course curriculum outside of, you know, school and work. Just see if there's anything that you can do to supplement that would help out your application. The next thing I would do, building off of that, is try to take any kind of courses, whether it be through Coursera or Kaggle, if you're looking into MSBA specifically. Having some sort of working knowledge of the tools or applications that are going to be studied in the program would definitely set you apart from applicants who have never heard of SQL or have no idea what Tableau is. It's going to give you a more competitive edge. Of course, you know, you're going into this program to learn. It doesn't really make sense if you're a master in SQL or a master in Python and then you're pursuing a master's degree, because you already know the subject matter. But I think having some sort of working knowledge, whether it be just through self-study or through work, would definitely give you an advantage, and it just makes your decision to apply to these programs a little bit more grounded, and makes it so that you are basing this decision off of some sort of prior experience, as opposed to just out of thin air you decide you want to apply to a master's in business analytics program. So I would start there and build off of that, so that you know, it just makes it so that you stand out from other applicants. And lastly, I would definitely take my time with the essay prompts. That is, especially for programs where the GREs are required and you don't plan on taking it and submitting your scores, that is going to be the bread and butter of your application. That's going to be pretty much the main source of information that the admissions board is going to use to determine whether or not you'd be a good fit and determine what you bring to the table as far as your cohort or the program itself. So I would definitely take my time with essay prompts. Make sure that you are writing your essays in a way that's true to your voice. And at least for me, for the programs that I applied to, it was more so just based on prior work examples that led to this decision, as opposed to as opposed to essay prompts for undergrad, where you're writing this like very vivid story about how you came to be the person you are, like how you grew, whether it be overcoming a sports injury or stepping down as a leader or helping out your family, you know, make ends meet, things like that. That's not necessarily what you'd want to submit for your essay prompts for a master's program, and especially for a more applied program like the programs I applied to. So I would take time in writing out the examples of, or the experiences that you have gained, whether it be through school or through work, and then making sure that it all is cohesive and coherent and explains who you are, what you bring to the table, what your experiences are, and why it makes sense, and it has led you to pursuing this master's degree. Whew, all right, well, that is my tips, or I guess outline on applying to a master's in business analytics program. I hope you found this helpful. If there are things that you wish I had talked about in this video, comment it down below so that I can make another video and answer your questions. Yeah, I hope that you found this helpful. And if you are applying to a master's in business analytics or an MBA or a master's in master's in data science, good luck. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.